Welcome to a new episode of You and AI, this little podcast project that was born out of the WorkPath community to provide impulses and orientation in a time where, quite frankly, things are moving really fast. So that's why we meet with executives and artificial intelligence experts to talk about their real life AI use cases and their outlook on the working world in an AI era. Today's guest has been working with machine learning, with AI in a business context since the 1990s. So long before it was what it is today. He is an author of several books on the topic, a very popular interview guest, as well as a keynote speaker on AI, like at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Professor Dr. Peter Gentsch holds the chair for international business administration at the HTW Aalen with a focus on Gen AI. He used to be a lecturer at the WHO, where he also did his PhD. And beyond academia, Peter has led AI transformation projects with major European corporates, and some of that you can find on his website as well. He is a serial entrepreneur with a few exits already. And more recently, he started the company Aiconiq, where he told me he's already working towards an IPO. He might tell us about it himself. So, welcome, Peter. Did I forget anything important in my introduction?
Hello, Johannes. Yeah, thanks for having me. I feel some pressure now. Thanks for the flowers. I will do my best. No, perfect. Perfect introduction.
Let's dive into it. And as always, we start personal. I just said it, right? From academia, being a speaker, an author, a founder, you do a lot. So could you maybe lead us through your typical work day or week and share when and how you interact with AI yourself, how AI assists you in your own work life?
Maybe you might expect that I use AI heavily crazy all day long because I'm an AI guy, but I really don't want that AI automates my life. I want to be in the driver's seat. So of course I use it for the obvious productivity tasks like, drafting an email, preparation of presentation and all that stuff. But time is the most valuable resource. So I try to balance that. What I really appreciate, and I do that, I would say every hour, is I have a digital partner and I try to have some controversial discussions with him. I want that the guy challenge me because your friends are always a little bit polite. They want to please you. And my digital colleague, he should think I'm an idiot and always try to challenge me, to provoke me. And this is so, I would say, so valuable if I have kind of discussions. It's a perfect preparation if you have somebody that challenges you. In addition to that, I also talk to Gary Ten every day. I think you know Gary Ten. It's a CEO of the Y Combinator, and he puts his skills on GitHub, and I use it. And of course, it's a kind of PR what he's doing, but it makes so much fun to talk to Gary and say, hey, we have a new idea. What about the go-to-market strategy? And you have this kind of reasoning board. So I would say it's rather a sounding board than a chat. And this is what I really like. And in addition to that, I would say I try to force myself not to get lazy. You know this cognitive laziness, this cognitive surrender. You prompt something, you get out of it, and so I really try to force myself to think beyond the results, critical thinking, because I think we are so lazy. And maybe talk about agents. We work a lot with the agents. It's so easy to get the shit done, to delegate everything to the agents. But I really try to stay critical. I think that's very important. Otherwise, we get really lazy because I think if you're smart and use smart AI, you can get even smarter. But if you use it just, as a tool to be lazy, I think that's not the way. And of course, I experience a lot of agents because, eat your own dog food. We are a company generating, producing, delivering agents. So at least, eat your own dog food. I have to understand how it feels to work with agents. But that doesn't mean that I work with agent all day long. And I think, the most important thing is the human touch. And I'm really happy that we talk in person with each other and not our agents talk with each other. So I would say a day, a week without human conversation would be terrible.
So how exactly does that sparring partner work? I do hear that more and more, also in corporate context, that actually different leaders, actually like Gary Tan, basically provide their AI clone to the company, and you can have a sparring with that before you enter into the CFO meeting. How exactly does that work? We have a very yes, executive and upper level management kind of audience, but also very hands-on people. So is that like a Claude skill where you constantly update things on the context, or how does your personal sounding
Yeah.
board and sparring partner work?
So the easy way would be just to use Gary 10. There's an existing skill. It's so easy to use that. My digital partner is more challenging, and that's at the end, it's all about prompting, you have this system prompt and tell him, please be critical. Don't believe what I'm saying. Try to provoke me. In addition to that, I put a lot of knowledge of myself. We have an AI biased interview technique. So AI is interviewing me. So what is my business rational, my personality type. So he has to understand how I think, how I act. So you can train these agents in a way that it fits to your person. So the one thing is you out of the box, you use Gary 10. The other way you train your own digital twin or colleague, which is think much more powerful than the out of the box Gary 10.
Okay. And do you use your own product, or how can I exactly imagine that? Like, what technology do you use for training your own partner
Yeah,
there?
as I mentioned, we have this kind of interview technique. That's an AI-based technique. It's
Okay.
dynamically. So when I get a question, I answer, and based on my answer, the next question come up. So this is a way to extract also tacit knowledge. Most people know this RAG, retrieval augmented generation. If you have books and you have PowerPoints, you can put it in the GPT. But I think the most valuable source of this kind of tacit knowledge, your experience, the soft skills. So we use a technology to feed these tacit knowledge into the large language model. And this is really very, very powerful, because then you have a holistic knowledge base and not just this, what you see in documents or in PowerPoint presentations. So I would say it's a hybrid approach. Of course, we use a hyperscaler. Claude is amazing. But in addition to that, we have tools as an orchestration layer on top of that.
Okay. So if we look back for a moment, because I mean, I've read some of your publications, listened to some of the interviews. You've been in this space for some time, right? And you've been trying to uh, support companies establishing more data-driven ways of managing a company, of supporting management decisions, and then applying machine learning on that database. And I feel like the challenges you described from back then, uh, it's a bit repetitive. Some of the old problems become more prevalent again. So on the one hand, would you have expected AI to become such a generational platform shift 10 years ago? And how do you compare your experiences back then in a practitioner's, in a business context, compared to today and what's possible today?
Mhm. Actually, I started as a researcher. I was very much academic driven, and I was dealing a lot with language, this kind of semantic, linguistic, this kind of ontologies and taxonomies. To be honest, it didn't work out at all, because language is so difficult to handle. It's this handcrafted rule. It doesn't work. And then the next step was, and we all know that kind of disruption, we call it machine learning and deep learning. And I think for me, it was clear that that is the way AI will work in the future, because it doesn't make sense to describe everything based on rules. So you have to learn patterns. You have to apply these patterns. And I think it's a logical conclusion to use this language and deep learning and combine it. And this is exactly what we talk about, the transformer architecture, which is actually, GPT, Claude, and so on. So, but I think I have never expected this big bang, if you combine and keep in mind, deep learning is not that new. NLP is not that new. There are two old technologies you put together, and then you come up with this amazing technology, this kind of generative AI. Honestly, I have never expected that. And the interesting part is, there were always a lot of AI achievements, advancements, but it was rather behind the scene. It was behind the products. Just think of the recommendation engines. Amazon, that's AI behind. So we call it the AI effect. You work with AI, but you're not aware that you're using AI. And that's changed dramatically, because now I call it the people AI. Everybody is using AI, and that's a big difference. It's a kind of citizen driven, consumer driven. Now it's really, I would say, it's accessible, it's conversational for all people. And that's new, that AI is not happening behind the scenes. So everybody's part of that. This kind of democratization, I've never expected that. So I think that's a big surprise. And by the way, I think that's exactly a really good development we are in right now.
That's a surprise. On the other hand, wouldn't you agree that the kind of challenges companies run into right now, right? You see like these different phases where everyone, and if it was only for FOMO, for fear of missing out, spending a lot on AI, and now realizing, okay, we can't really make it work for ourselves in this established structures. And I feel like just the last couple of weeks, you hear more people talking about like, okay, we have to take a step back. We have to reimagine topics around data governance, how the operating model is built. Like this has nothing to do with AI, but we're not really ready to use AI. Like I feel like there are some similar patterns to what were the challenges in earlier waves of digitization automation? How do you reflect on that? Is it the same? Is it different?
I don't want to bore you with that, but you all know this challenges and limitations in Germany. German angst, we have the governance. We don't have the money like the hyperscaler. I'm so tired of that because what I do not understand, it's so fucking easy to use this new technology. Yeah. It's a kind of democratization that people at least should be curious to play around. But I know so many companies that are okay, that's another hype. We will wait. There's no sense of urgency. Oh, it's overhyped and underdelivered. So at least to be curious to work with that. And I see the same patterns again. We talk about data privacy, sometimes an excuse. Actually, at the moment I see three kind of businesses. The one, very agile companies, small companies like our company or the other small and medium enterprises. They're curious. They try to unleash the value of AI. Okay. The second are the rather, okay, let's wait a bit. I don't think it's really a game changer. And then we have the corporates, and the corporates, of course, they're trapped in the governance issues. And it's so ridiculous if you think about that. At home, the people are using a powerful Claude GPT. Then go into the office in the corporate, and then they are limited by a co-pilot. That's ridiculous. And a lot of executive I talk to, they're saying, okay, we have Copilot, we have Joule from SAP. I understand them some way because they have contracts, there seems to be safe, you don't have guarantees and all that stuff. But these companies are not willing and understanding the real power of AI, not having a co-pilot, it's just an assistant. It's so, and this is a big problem. And this is exactly the pattern you asked for. I would say it's the same 10 or 20 years ago. Um, the good news, I would say, it's a little bit more business driven. 10 or 20 years ago, it was something, or data is something that belongs to the IT department. Now I would say we understand that's a business engine, but we have to more curious to play around with that. And I don't know why, and I always try to convince people. And I think this podcast is also a great opportunity, maybe to motivate people to play around because it's amazing. I did my PhD in the 90s. It sucks so much time to label data. It was not fun. And now from scratch, you can easily showcase things. You can play around. And I just ask myself why they're not doing that.
So, if I understand you correctly, you say a lot of what you currently hear among corporate leaders of we have to take the step back, focus on governance, focus on operating models, etc., before we can actually make AI work. That's also an excuse. That's something to hide behind. And the bigger issue you really see is in the culture and the awareness and the urgency.
Absolutely. And what's really important to see, that's a leadership topic. Of course, we have this, I would say, bottom-up approach. People are using AI in the company. Maybe the C-suite is not aware of that, but you have to understand that it's the business engine. And in Germany, we're very much focused on an efficiency, and we don't see the opportunity of growth. I think that's very important. A lot of companies just say, okay, I have a process and now I can put in an AI process or an agentic process. I have an example. In March, I was in Austin, South by Southwest, and I ordered an Uber. And the first time Waymo came up, it was so exciting. I was sitting in the back. It was
Driving,
great.
yeah.
But then the AI, was using the steering wheel and say, that's weird. AI doesn't need a steering wheel. What I'm trying to say is sometimes we should rethink business. Maybe we don't need a steering wheel anymore. Maybe, try to think the process in a different way. There's a saying, if you digitize a bad process, then you have a shitty digital process. And I think companies which are ahead and which are maybe seeing the potential of AI, they're not just putting the process into an AI process. They try to build new processes. And for example, we have projects where we run simultaneously different scenarios that was not possible before based on traditional AI or just people work. So we have the potential not only to automate processes, to innovate processes, to come up with new business ideas. And this is a real potential of AI. And, I think we are not that good in Germany because we are very much about cost reduction, efficiency. We should think more about innovation and growth.
So you have started Aiconiq, as I mentioned. You are developing and selling AI solutions. Are there any patterns you can share? Like, how can you tackle that issue you just mentioned, right? Talking about maybe a lack of awareness or cultural issues, because I agree. I experience similar things. I think AI, in terms of where things are developing, is a huge divider right now as well, in the sense that some are really pulling apart ahead and actually do have tremendous success with it, and then others are probably falling behind. And those divides also go through leadership teams and companies, and it has nothing to do with age or the level you are on per se, right? I do see board members who really embrace, like, C-suite back to work, who are super hands-on, who built their own little army of AI agents. And I see frontline employees who are in their 20s or early 30s who are like really not buying into it, or maybe also have been a bit disillusioned by the worst experiences of Microsoft Copilot, and they think that's AI. So I see all of that. So what are angles that work, or what are entry points? How can you make that change happen besides like talking about it? How can you shake up management maybe also where it's necessary?
Yeah, I think executives are a little bit tired of these AI as a game changer. And, just think of the metaverse, Second Life, conversational commerce, so overhyped and never come true. So I understand in some way executives are, I'm a little bit skeptical about that. My thing is you have to feel the power of AI. And as I told you, it was never been that easy to come up as a first pilot. So I usually, maybe it sounds very trivial, but start with a small, very focused process. Maybe a process that's not that critical, maybe not that customer related, maybe not a governance issue. And it's so easy. Give me one day and I will show you the power of agents supporting this process. I really had the experience that once an executive sees the power, maybe it's a sandbox approach, whatever, it's inspire him to do, okay, now I understand what's going on. Because slideware, it's boring, they're always, they claim to be the game changer, the next generation. To put into practice, let them feel the power of agents, come up with pilots. And by the way, we do that without charging anything because it's so easy. I think the easiest way is to convince people by practicing it, to feel it, to see the potential of it. Coming from that, of course, at the end of the day, sorry to say, it's very boring. It's about change management. The problem is we have actually is the technology evolves so quickly, exponentially, and the capabilities of organization to adapt accordingly are not that fast. So we have to bridge the gap. And this is about upskilling, reskilling, change management. It's nothing new. We talk about that for years when it comes to digital transformation. That's not AI specific. But the difference is that it's so easy to get the point across. What is the potential of AI? Just showing it. And I think that's a big difference.
Can you share one or two of your favorite use cases or example where you think that that's something that really makes a board member or any kind of manager actually experience that value that you talk about?
Yeah, it's a company dealing with ERP systems, enterprise resource planning. By the way, that's a pain. You won't. I never was so familiar with ERP system, but this is really a pain. And the question was, the guy told me, the executive, the shareholders, oh, it takes so much time to develop an ERP system, to install it, to implement, to train. It takes more than 1 year, sometimes 10 years. And I said, what, are you kidding? an ERP system, at the end of the day, we have zeros and ones, they have to manage. It's not so difficult. And then we create a digital assistant, a smart guy on the right side on the ERP system. And the employees could ask if they have a problem, just ask the buddy. What the name was, it's my buddy. Okay. And then I remember the day where the CEO said, okay, if this guy is so smart to help my people, why he's not doing this job? So the next level was the agent was running the ERP system. So, and now the question is, oh, the employees have been replaced and kicked out. No, because now they are able, the existing people, the team of experts can now handle many more projects. They can reduce the time, they can increase efficiency. So it was exactly that. Start very simple. Okay, here's a buddy helping your employees. Okay, the buddy is so smart, he can run the process. And by the way, the next thing is we don't need the ERP system anymore because we have just agent doing the job. That's the next level. You see, it's a kind of maturity model. We start very simple, very easy. But the executive realized, oh, it's not a nice icing on the cake. It's about cost reduction, efficiency. And I think it has to contribute to the top and bottom line. And that's a problem. We have a lot of fancy cases when it comes to writing a blog, maybe writing an email. That's not bad. But, for executives, I think you have to be very clear about KPIs. And this is one of the projects I like very much because we started so easy, so simple. And now we run the completely agentic enterprise. So that's exactly the way I think we should introduce AI in a company.
Do you want to say a few more words about what Aiconiq is doing, right? It's like one example now. And from what I take, it's like your main focus right now. Like how would you describe the portfolio of things you're doing there?
We are struggling so much with the elevator pitch because I always say building the agentic enterprise, but I know it sounds rather academic. I deeply convinced that the organization of tomorrow will be a hybrid organization, having people and digital coworkers. And we enable companies to do that. And for that, you need, first of all, a knowledge base. An agent can only do a good job if you have the knowledge. I come back to my idea of tacit knowledge. And agents need just, you have maybe a lot of documentations and manuals, all that stuff you can feed in. But a smart agent has organizational knowledge, skills, experience. So the first, you have to create the knowledge base. We call it the corporate brain we're building. Secondly, we create agents that act accordingly to the knowledge base. And the third pillar is you have to do this kind of change management. Okay, how to onboard an agent? Have to be polite to the agent, have to pay a salary, whatever. So it's a combination that we bring the knowledge base into the company. We create the agents, we call them the buddies, and we help the companies to install these agentic enterprise. I know there's so much hype around agentic and agents. Everybody's talking about that. But for me, it's really important, it's not an assistant because assistant is nice like a co-pilot. But an agent, be aware of that, has an objective, it learns and acts autonomously. And actually, we're not used to that. We're used to have automated processes. But now it's the first time that tech runs autonomously. So we delegate responsibility to the system. That's completely new. So, and sometimes people, I think, mix it up and say, oh, I have an assistant doing my, no, it goes far beyond. And I think it's so interesting to see this agentic enterprise running autonomously. And maybe this, the bet from Sam Altman, who is building the first unicorn, just having one employee. Yeah, of course, if you have the agentic workflows, then it comes down to the entrepreneur that has a great vision and everything is done by the AI. We are far away from that. But so to put it in a nutshell, I think we are building the agentic enterprise, knowledge, agents, enablement. I would say that's described. But you see, there's some room for improvement. We are still, like a startup, it's always kind of pivot.
Of course,
You
right
get
now
feedback from the market, you adjust.
everything is moving, yes,
Yeah,
and faster than ever. I think all the people in
absolutely.
tech I admire the most are the ones that really, like, I think the closer you are to actually building and participating in what's happening there, the more you realize like it's impossible to predict what's going to be real and the reality in 3 or even 6 months. So
100%.
I am convinced about this, and I share the enthusiasm. I'm really excited. I wouldn't have thought of like the things I can do now with Claude Code 2 years ago. I would have never believed that I would get to that point myself. So that's obviously really exciting. But we've been there in the beginning of the conversation, right? We do have a European audience. Sometimes I have my German doubts and questions, of course, and the people and companies I work with. So uh, getting back to some of the limitations also, how do you think about, like, how do companies have to think about sovereignty, and also like what defines a company still if you have the agentic organization, right? So I think right now a lot of companies are holding back because they think if we actually run all our processes but also have this company brain on one of those hyperscaler environments, like what is left there if every employee's tacit and non-tacit knowledge is somewhere stored? Like, do we even have a company anymore, or is that run on completely like foreign and foreignly controlled infrastructure? How do you think about that aspect?
Yeah. The example I mentioned, the CEO told me, "Oh, you rebuild my company. You have everything. You can restart your company, my company by your own." I think that's a very serious one. First of all, it doesn't make sense to use the public version of Claude and OpenAI. I will never do that. Of course, there are cases that are not critical. You can use the power, the innovation of these large scale models, which is fantastic. But then there are use cases. I would say you need a protected AI, at least just to analyze the data, if it comes to employee data and customer data. And of course, there are some really critical things you shouldn't share with your competitors or with Sam Altman or Mark Zuckerberg. I think what's really underestimated are these kind of local models. They are very good, powerful local models. And then they're criticized and say, oh, they're not so powerful like GPT. Of course, but they don't have to be that powerful because you can train local models for a certain purpose, maybe for marketing, maybe for sales. And if you have really crucial information, I would strongly recommend to have that local AI, because we all now felt how we depend on the hyperscalers when, Mythos was, shut down. We couldn't use in Europe, so we can feel. So of course, resilience is important, sovereignty, but not from a geopolitical point of view, from a business point of view. The most critical business processes you run, the most critical data you have, you should have your corporate brain, and that should be not in the cloud. Okay, you should be in control of that. Okay, but a lot of use cases, there's not the need for that, so you can run these models. So I would answer that we need a kind of a hybrid approach where we have this sovereignty when it comes to very critical things, and we have these open models where it's maybe, it's public data or whatever. So it's a hybrid approach, but I think it's strongly underestimated the power of local models. And I think it's a little bit emotional discussion, well, the hyperscaler, they're evil, they will get my data and they will sell my data. It's the same was the discussion when it comes to the cloud computing. I know a lot of we never use a cloud, and most of the small and medium enterprises in Germany are using Amazon, Google, whatever. So I think we have to be very much aware of the risk. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to say just share the data. You need a dedicated hybrid approach, but the good news, you can solve the problem. It sometimes it's so irrational. We have data privacy regulation, AI, EU. So there's a solution for that. That's a good news. So sometimes it's really an excuse, I would say.
Okay, fair. I think that's a topic for definitely another conversation and deep dive in itself. This format here is intentionally crisp, so we're already approaching the end, and let's look into the future a little bit. Are there any like ideas out there, topics in the news where you'd say like you don't think AI will get there? So maybe you have areas where you are a bit more sort of like down to earth than what people talk about, or vice versa. Are there any areas where you think it will actually move much faster than most people expect? It's like in a year from now, you would make a prediction like things will happen that are just hard to imagine for many.
Yeah, what I haven't expected that AI is entering the C-suite, that now you can use AI for strategic decisions. There's an interesting study, the Harvard guys, you have an executive board, and then they have an AI modeled board, like a digital twin. And then they try to figure out which is better, the AI board or the human-based board. And you won't believe, in any aspect, the AI board was outperforming the human board. There's some exception when it comes to short-term de-escalation, whatever. So what I'm trying to say is, it's not only about, repetitive work or tasks or easy tasks. It enters into the executive level. I have never expected that you can really use it as an executive, and maybe sometime these kind of digital executive maybe come up with better decisions. What I
We
won't do,
put some of that into the show notes. Like, I'm doing some work with my team on this as well. I think also at
whoa,
MIT, they're doing really interesting research. So we put those into the show notes of the episode
perfect.
because that is indeed really interesting. Yes.
And on the other hand, usually I said I would never delegate responsibility and judgment to an AI. But honestly, it's said that the new reasoning models have an IQ about 186. Of course, from a scientific point of view, but just to make clear, they're very, very smart. And I just have not one smart agent, I have a swarm of agents. Why not delegating judgment to them, So I changed my mind because, my experience when I talked to Gary Tan and all the guys, my God, it's so helpful. I would say the final decision should stay with us humans. But kind of judgment, of course, you can delegate to the AI. And I think this is a little bit underestimated.
I agree. And I think it's a almost philosophical process as well, right? As much as we will have more thinking about what actually defines a company, if things are moving so much and the way value is created is shaping so differently. But also, actually, I do have the first kind of customers where a COO asked me, like, what does it even mean to be a human in that kind of world? And I think the ones that are honest and the ones that are more progressive, they realize, like, also the thing that I'm on the board, the questions I'm asking, the things that I'm doing, like, it's not so exotic or unattainable for AI if you provide the context, if you set it up in the right way. So I think that's going to lead to some really, really interesting questions and also challenging debates and regulatory debates about how we shape this as a society. It's nothing that just stops within the borders of a company.
100%.
So last question into the future. And this question is so funny because when I asked the question 6 months ago, what would be your dream agent, right? We had the CDO of Bosch Mobility, we had strategy leader of Siemens Energy, like really people who are at the forefront of deploying AI, applying AI in their corporate context. And still, the ideas that we heard sometimes, just because of the pace of development and how AI progresses, they're just almost normal. They're absolutely possible. So that's an interesting side effect of having this format now. Just, it's a closed series, but over a few couple of months, how fast things are moving. So
Yeah.
does that even exist? Do you still have ideas that you dream of, like the dream agent, how you would have your personal consultant, coach, you name it? What would be your dream agent that maybe today is not possible yet?
I wouldn't say it's a single super agent, or rather a chief of staff, orchestrating different agents and maybe also giving answers to questions I have never asked, this kind of anticipation, not just to react, but to anticipate maybe what's going on and help me in that way. That would be very helpful. It should have, I would say, memory of an elephant. And of course, I have to trust it. And that's a problem. My dream agent would also enter the agentic commerce field, doing all this boring things to what buying stuff or planning a journey, whatever. Honestly, at the moment, technical wise, it's possible, but I do not trust these agents. So my perfect agent, I should trust him and he should orchestrate all my different agents in a smart way. And hopefully they will put me sometimes in the loop. So I will be part of the game and maybe hopefully I will still be in the driver's seat.
All right. I'm sure that's basically around the corner having that kind of assistant, but still, let's see how things are moving there. Thank you very much for your time today. Wish you all the best for the next couple of months. And yeah, maybe we do another check-in soon, but for today, let's call it a day. Thank you again for your time.
And if you want to follow my personal journey of AI, maybe you can keep an eye on the stock market in September. I don't want to make any recommendation to buy shares. Don't get me wrong. But I think the IPO of Entropic and OpenAI, they're still far away. Maybe that's a good alternative. Don't get me wrong. Just keep an eye on it. Okay.
All right. We put your LinkedIn profile into the show notes as well so people can follow your journey. Definitely an interesting one. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you so much. Great pleasure.
This was another episode of You and AI. Thank you for listening in. If you would like to hear more stories like this, I recommend you to subscribe to this podcast and to visit workpath.com/AI. If you are driving the AI transformation in your company, or if you are a leader who is interested in these dream agents that we discuss here, we'd be happy to talk, and you can always reach out by scheduling a call through that webpage.